Today we're going to look at how I diagnosed a hard brake pedal concern and a code of P0556 on a 2017 F-150. Recently I looked at a 2017 F-150 with a 3.5 EcoBoost engine and a continuous memory DTC of P0556 in the PCM. Ford uses a pressure sensor on the brake booster to measure the actual vacuum level there, and this is used as an input for the PCM and for the ABS, and is where this code came from. Now, P0556 is a brake booster pressure sensor circuit range performance code. Basically, it means that the PCM isn't happy with the vacuum level it's seeing on that sensor. So I gave the vacuum lines a quick look over and didn't really see any issues. The brake pedal felt okay. The sensor was reading about negative 10 psi, which would be about 20 inches of mercury, so the vacuum seemed acceptable. So at this point I went ahead and cleared the code and then took the vehicle for a test drive to see if I could get the code to return. Now there was a couple of issues I noticed while I was driving the vehicle. If you drove up a long hill or a long grade where it was under a load for a considerable amount of time, the vacuum level would keep dropping, or the pressure level would keep rising, whichever way you want to look at it. But when I started it, I had a negative 10 psi pressure in the vacuum booster. By the time I get to the top, there's almost none. I think it's like negative 1 psi. Now, after seeing the vacuum drop this low while going up that hill, I pulled over and rechecked codes on this vehicle, and this was the first time that it reset the low vacuum code in memory. The other thing I kind of realized on this vehicle after test driving it and playing around with it a little bit was that if you held the vehicle with the brakes and then loaded the engine a little bit, the vacuum level on the brake booster would continue to drop. You could pretty easily make it drop all the way down to 1 or 2 psi, just like you could when you're going up that long hill. So at this point I was thinking it was probably an issue with a vacuum check valve. But these are no longer on the brake booster. The fitting at the brake booster is just a straight through fitting now. It's not a check valve any longer. There is a check valve, and it's built into the vacuum line assembly that plugs into the booster. If you're wondering what they're doing with this giant vacuum line mess they have on newer vehicles, they keep making the brake boosters larger, so it requires less pedal effort when you apply the brakes. Now that allows the brakes to be applied with very little effort, but the problem with that is if you get into a situation where you're using the engine for engine braking and the vacuum level goes really high, it can actually apply the brakes. So to prevent that from happening, they actually have another line that runs over to the clean air side after the air filter on the air inlet to the engine. And on this particular vehicle, it looks like they use a computer controlled vacuum solenoid to actually bleed that vacuum off as necessary. Now, after looking at the check valve and this actuator and everything in that vacuum line assembly, I could not find any problems or issues with anything on it, which to me indicated it had to be a vacuum leak somewhere after the check valve, so that almost meant it had to be at the brake booster itself. At this point I hooked a smoke machine up to the brake booster to try and see if there were any leaks. I just went in through the fitting where the vacuum line normally applies, and it was leaking quite a bit. After looking into it a little bit and getting the light involved, it looked like it was leaking between the master cylinder and the booster out at the bottom. Now the master cylinders that are used on these vehicles do have a rubber O-ring that seals between the master cylinder and the booster to prevent vacuum leaks, but I couldn't find any issue with the seal either. And at this point I realized the bottom of the flange on the brake booster was actually bent inward. And after speaking with the customer, it turned out that the vehicle had been previously in a collision and had been repaired by a body shop. I'm assuming the master cylinder got pushed up or down in that collision and probably actually bent the flange on the booster, causing the leak. After a brake booster replacement, the vacuum levels stayed a lot stabler. Like right here, we're going to do the brake stand test again. And you can see the vacuum level doesn't even drop off at all. I'm standing on the brake and revving the engine up. For the most part, the vacuum level stays between negative 9 and negative 11 psi now. It does fluctuate once in a while when you step on the brake pedal or something, but not very much. And honestly, when you step on the brake pedal, occasionally it even goes up a little bit, which I'm assuming is probably that computer-controlled vacuum dump solenoid, and maybe it closes sometimes when you step on the brake pedal to give you a little more vacuum. That's the only reason I could think of that the vacuum level might actually come up a little bit when you step on the brake pedal, because normally you would expect it to drop just a little bit every time you stepped on the pedal. And as the final step, retest it one more time and make sure the codes didn't come back after the test drive. If you found this interesting or helpful, please click the like button down below. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up, some interesting problems I ran into, some hard to diagnose stuff, so please subscribe. If you've ran into this problem or something similar, please tell me about it in the comments section down below. As always, I hope you have a great week and take care.